Hello everyone, and welcome. Today we're back with another recontextualized story, telling a tale from a perspective that it is not usually approached from. Today we have a story that several of you may know about, but for those who don't, it is one of the strangest cases of a repeated crime that may never have been discovered if it weren't for how it escalated into murder. Much like the last case we covered, the majority of our tale today is set back in the beautiful Pacific Northwest of America. But before that, we begin briefly in the year 1996 in Long Beach, California, a portside city in Los Angeles County. It's known for its cycling scene, artistry, outdoor exploration, and of course, sunsets by the beach. It is here in this iconic location that the newly married James and Rose Amber were looking to begin a happy, stable life with their bouncing 2-year-old daughter, Rachel. James had been struggling for some time, but had finally found his footing in life and a stable career as a lawyer, while Rose seemed to be the grace that James needed, being a fantastic housewife and mother to Rachel. Throughout the years, they would watch their daughter grow into a fiery and passionate young woman, developing numerous talents and ambitions that they could sometimes scarcely keep up with. From showbiz to sport, art, music, acting, modeling, rock climbing, even law, much like her father. Following her eclectic talents, when Rachel was fast approaching the age of 16, she applied to a private senior high school that specialized in science and, more importantly, the arts. This school, Blackwell Academy, was a less common type of institution, acting as a sort of intermediary between the latter years of high school and beginning years of college, preparing students during that time for pursuing their elevated goals. Naturally, Rachel got accepted, and her parents were more than willing to facilitate her growth by picking up and moving house themselves to be closer to where she would be studying. Which brings us to our main setting. So long, Long Beach, we're heading over to Oregon. Blackwell Academy laid in the middle of a small coastal town called Arcadia Bay. Like a lot of places in that area, the bay features gorgeous beaches and stunning woodland areas. In the sleepy town itself were the usual facilities and businesses you'd expect: diners, schools, your local mechanics, residential areas, junkyards, etc. Rachel wasted no time in making a name for herself at school. Meanwhile, her parents continued their usual routine in a new idyllic home, James working as a district attorney for numerous local cases. However, in such a chilled-out small town, a teen like Rachel could only satiate her fiery personality among normal daily activities for so long, meaning that in no time, Rachel had grown popular enough to get invited to both parties held by school clubs and house concerts held by the local indie music scene. She got along with characters from every sect of town society. But despite capitalizing on all the activities the town had to offer, Rachel often expressed to friends that she wanted more. Not only was she extremely eager to jumpstart her modeling career and get out of the small town in the process, but she also missed her hometown in Long Beach. Restless was basically the perfect word to describe her. But 3 years passed, and Rachel lived them to the fullest, a raging fire in the small seaside town. She had newfound independence in her 3rd year at the school. She kept her grades up and was always there for the adventure, well on her way to pursuing a modeling career, as she had often expressed to those who would listen, letting people take pictures of her whenever possible. Her parents and teachers had nothing but positive things to say about her, and it seemed like almost everyone in town either knew her, knew of her, or knew her father, the district attorney. Which is why the events surrounding this one girl in the spring of 2013 would inevitably end up shaking the entire town. On Friday, April 19th, 2013, Rachel began her day like she would any other. She woke up sometime around mid-morning, missing one of her classes, and left the Blackwell girls' dormitories, saying hi and making small talk with students along the way. Throughout the day, Rachel could be seen making her way from one place to another, eating lunch with a friend, talking with other friends from school, attending remaining classes, and hanging out with some of the locals and listening to music. Checking out the scene at various hangout spots in the town. Pretty soon, the day turned to night, and much like many other girls, Rachel hadn't bothered to return to sleep at her dorm, room 224. The other girls that were there often expected that Rachel could be staying over at any number of places. At one of her friends' places, at her suspected boyfriend's place, at her parents', etc. Especially if she were attending a party or get-together. Saturday rolled around and, of course, Rachel still hadn't returned to the dorms, which was understandable since it was still the weekend, and Rachel had no academic responsibilities that couldn't be pushed to the next week. Sunday came and went, and her dorm mates still hadn't seen hide nor tail of her. Much like the previous night, they figured it's just Rachel being a party animal. Some people figured that Rachel was simply suffering from the effects of a hangover, or simply was too tired. Everyone knew Rachel would sort out her affairs regardless of how much she missed on a day. But still, as the day wore on and no one anywhere had had any real contact with Rachel since Friday, the school administration had decided to give her a call to verify the reason for her prolonged absence from the campus. However, the school was unsuccessful in their attempt as her phone simply rang until going to voicemail. Her education still being paid for by her parents, the school then notified them of her absence and left it up to them to get a hold of Rachel to make sure things were going okay. Meanwhile, a few of Rachel's close friends were also trying to get a hold of her. It was when the school day was long over and no one on their individual front had heard anything from Rachel that the worries began to escalate. Her parents had gotten in contact with any friends of Rachel's that they knew to find out when she was last seen. Being as popular as she was, word soon got around that she was being looked for. They asked the school security guards if they had seen her, and went to local hotspots that she frequented to ask around. Her phone was rung several more times by several different people, all to no avail. While normally a cause for a certain amount of concern, Rachel's usual behaviors led the people in her life to be on the more optimistic side, assuming that she was more than likely fine and just being frustrating with her lack of contact. Even her parents thought that that could be the case, but they understandably chose to err on the side of caution, and with the support of the Blackwell administration, they decided to go to the police to file a missing persons report. And so began the worried but oddly hindered search for Rachel Amber. Now, like so many cases, the first response to Rachel going missing was kept back by the fact that she was an adult, who up to that point had a tendency to go off on her own. She wore her independence on her sleeve, and in describing her personality to the police, the obvious thought that crossed their mind was that perhaps she just opted to ditch school for a while and cut contact. It was a possibility that is always on the table when going to the police about missing teens. And while Rachel's parents, teachers, and colleagues were concerned about her, they all secretly shared a similar sentiment. Rachel herself had also expressed to friends that she was tired of small-town life and couldn't wait to just bail on everything and start up a new life back in California or New York, or maybe anywhere. She really wanted to escape, so initial action from the police was a bit less than ideal, with them delaying further urgent action for at least a day after the report was made. In the meantime, people in Rachel's immediate life made concerted efforts to find her through typical avenues, places around town that she frequented, diners, barn houses, junkyards, beaches, friends' houses, movie theaters, trailer parks, anything. Students at Blackwell were told to be on the lookout for the girl and report anything they saw of her. But 2 days into her being reported missing and 3 days of her not even being seen by anyone, there was still no trace. Around the 24th, the police finally decided to take further action regarding Rachel's missing report, doing investigations at Blackwell's campus and locations around Arcadia Bay. It was mostly just rehashing what other friends of Rachel's were already doing, the police having gone to people that knew her to ask about her comings and goings. When talking with Rachel's parents, they further inquired about the reasons Rachel could have for simply just running away, a possibility which of course her parents couldn't deny. It was in these interviews with her parents that local police found that there were extenuating circumstances that led Rachel to want to leave, beyond just her passion for adventure. James highlighted that back in 2010, their family had undergone serious internal strife due to Rachel uncovering the fact that Rose Amber, his wife of 13 years, was not Rachel's biological mother. The discovery had been prompted by the visit of Rachel's biological mother, Sarah Gerhardt, that year, who had wanted to meet her daughter. Due to a troubled history regarding Sarah's use of drugs in her first year of being a mother, James did not grant that request. But Rachel had inquired about the woman upon seeing her, and the truth subsequently came out. James and Sarah had divorced in 1995, around a year after Rachel was born, after which he had started a new life with Rose a year later. James and Rose let authorities know that their relationship with Rachel had been strained after that reveal, with Rachel having a desire to meet her mother Sarah, and going through some questionable avenues to do so. It was during the initial time of the discovery that Rachel even sought out local drug dealers to inquire about Sarah buying from them. The police would note these events in case there was the possibility of foul play. Rachel had become more distant and standoffish, especially with her father James. She spent even more time out of the house, eventually opting to move into Blackwell Academy's dorms, even though her parents' house was a moderate walk away from the campus. The police inquired if there was any chance that Rachel may have gone to stay with Sarah or any relatives of hers. Her parents said they had already called all Rachel's family to let them know of Rachel's disappearance, and none could offer knowledge of where she might be. They weren't sure if Rachel would have made it back to California yet, if that was indeed where she would be headed, and so they surmised that not even Sarah may know of Rachel's whereabouts, or even if Rachel knew of hers. The police later got in contact with Sarah and confirmed that she hadn't been in contact with Rachel either. A few days of investigation were had over in Long Beach, California, Rachel's hometown. Ultimately, it turned up nothing. After a few months of investigation, the case of the missing Rachel Amber seemed to have gone cold. Police had no real leads as to where she could be, and were further deterred by theirs and others' beliefs that there was no foul play involved. And so, about 4 months after her disappearance in late April, the Arcadia Bay Police Department's investigation in the Rachel Amber disappearance was officially closed. While the police were done searching, some of Rachel's close friends still wanted to keep an eye out for her though, as evidenced by the custom missing persons posters scattered around. However, these posters seem to have been the last bastion in the search for her, as even her parents had come to accept that their daughter had left them of her own accord. And so life moved on in Arcadia Bay. Summer came and went. The new school year began. For the first month, September of that year 2013, things at Blackwell Academy went as plainly and normally as usual, as students adapted to the fresh new start of the school year. That is until the following month, when an unexpected and rather horrifying event took place within the walls of the prestigious school. The date was October 7th, 2013. It had been a normal Monday of classes at Blackwell Academy, like any other Monday. Bit of a slog and kind of low energy, but teachers and students alike made it through to the afternoon. Soon enough, 4 p.m. rolled around and the bell rang, signaling the end of the last class for most at the school. Students flooded the halls, some chatting away, some gathering their things and making their way outside, some getting lectured by teachers. Typical school fare. But suddenly, that typical school day vibe was shattered by a terrifying noise that no student wants to hear. A gunshot. A single shot rang out within the Blackwell Academy halls shortly after 4 p.m. Upon hearing the gunshot, the students that filled the halls in the immediate vicinity immediately broke into a panic, and several of them ran out of the building as fast as they possibly could. No one could be sure as to where the gunshot came from, so it was their first priority to just make as much distance away from the building as possible. Students and teachers that were still in the building could only freeze in whatever they were doing. The security guard on duty at the time, David Madsen, took it upon himself to attempt to secure the area, based on the direction he heard the gunshot come from, and after asking students who had fled the hallways where the sound most likely came from, he eventually narrowed the origin of the shot to be near the student bathrooms. While it would have been wiser for Madsen to wait for the backup he had called, he said that he felt eager to act, certain that if anyone had been shot, time would be of the essence if they could possibly be saved. Madsen said he treated the matter with military caution as he scouted out the hallway outside the bathrooms from a point of cover. There was no active shooter to be seen, and he thought that perhaps the shooter had moved on from the area or escaped in the chaos. But suddenly, there was something that Madsen could hear, the sound of what could be described as shuffling and whispering coming from inside the girls' bathroom. He thought that maybe it could be yet another student panicked and traumatized by the event, hiding out of sight. But the faint tone of voice seemed to be more than just fear and panic, but one also of frustration. Choosing to investigate, Madsen closed in on the room, and after narrowly cracking the door and peering through, he could see exactly the grisly scene he had been looking for. Inside the girls' bathroom, a blond young man was hunched over the body of a blue-haired girl who was quite simply not moving. Upon closer inspection, the floor around the girl was becoming increasingly soaked in blood, and the young man was babbling incoherently to himself, with a gun visible on the floor near to both of them. Recognizing the young, blood-soaked girl on the floor, Madsen almost instantly sprung into action, swiftly bursting through the door and incapacitating the frantic young man. He took him to the floor on his stomach, placed his hands behind his back, bound him, and began trying to quell the young man's struggling. At the same time, Madsen had tried to call out to the young woman on the floor, but she was unresponsive. She had a gunshot wound to her abdomen, and any attempts at stopping the bleeding were ineffective. Shortly after the Arcadia Bay police arrived to take control of the situation, they took the boy into custody and secured the body of the blue-haired girl. What must have been a 20-minute period of panic and uncertainty at the school came to a thankful close, but sadly, the incident left the school with a traumatized student population and, even more tragically, a deceased young girl. The girl in question was identified to have been one 19-year-old Chloe Price, a former student of Blackwell Academy, and actually the stepdaughter to the security guard that found her, David Madsen. Many knew Chloe as she was a rather rambunctious and strong personality in Arcadia Bay, often looking to have fun, whether or not it was within what adults would consider acceptable behavior. She had been expelled from the school almost 3 years ago, but still maintained connections with some of her old classmates. The young man and suspected shooter found at the awful bathroom scene was quickly identified to have been 18-year-old Nathan Prescott, a prominent figure at Blackwell. He was the son of the well-known Sean Prescott, the patriarch of the Prescott family, a wealthy and influential family in the town that regularly provided funding to Blackwell Academy. So, needless to say, this was a huge deal. After taking the boy into the police station for questioning, he had been frantic, not at all calm and collected, and not quite cooperative either. His family hadn't yet arrived to see their son, and the police spent no time outlining the crime scene to him. Nathan was too incoherent to offer up any meaningful information at first. He claimed to not know what had happened, that the blue-haired girl had been yelling at him, demanding him to give her money, and that everyone was trying to control him. He wasn't making total sense. When ultimately asked if he was the one who shot the gun, he denied it, but in his shaky state, it was a hardly convincing answer. But when asked to offer up an answer to what exactly had happened, Nathan again didn't give any sensible response. Police outlined that there was one other person in the bathroom who had heard what happened. At the school, the police had in fact found another student in the furthest stall at the back of the bathroom. The student, they said, had been using the bathroom when a commotion started between Nathan and the blue-haired girl, now confirmed to be Chloe Price. They were arguing back and forth and had been throwing around insults. The girl had been upset with Nathan and seemed to be asking for money, threatening him with disclosing knowledge of something Nathan had done. The conflict continued when suddenly Chloe's voice became worried, as she asked Nathan where he got that. That, most likely referring to the gun found on the ground at the scene. Nathan then yelled at Chloe more for a brief moment, at which point Chloe was heard yelling back, and then came the gunshot. The witness said they heard a loud thud, and Nathan was the only remaining voice that the student could hear. From that point, the student witness had remained hidden and frozen, too shocked to move a muscle, until the police eventually found them after removing Nathan from the scene. The student was thankfully unharmed, but clearly traumatized as their eyes were red and their face was streaked with tears. Their identity was withheld for their protection. Knowing that there was a witness, Nathan evidently could no longer keep his shaky facade going. He was no longer jittery and frantic, but defeated and desperate. He corroborated the events that the witness had described, again adding in extra points about how people loved to control him. He began apologizing over and over in what must have been another mental breakdown, saying sorry for things that were completely unrelated, from bullying to not listening to his teacher. The police steered the interrogation back on course, asking Nathan what had caused the conflict in the bathroom, if he knew the girl prior, and if he had had any dealings with her. He ended up confessing to the events that had happened a few days before. Now, let's take a brief look at Nathan in detail, the teen's past leading up to the events that he begins describing to the police. Born August 25th, 1995, Nathan was the youngest son of the Prescott family in Arcadia Bay. He had what one might consider a fairly privileged existence growing up. Being part of such a wealthy, influential family, Sean Prescott, Nathan's father, was known by many to be a rather harsh man, being under the pressures of his name and career. Despite Nathan being spoiled on his family's riches, he was not exempt from his father's expectations. His less than ideal development at home carried through to him being known around Blackwell Academy as a spoiled, rich, aggressive brat by other students, but influential all the same. As classmates would tell it, he could avoid responsibility using his name and felt that he was above everything at the school. The principal at the time, Mr. Raymond Wells, often spoke highly of Nathan, despite the many problems that teachers at the school had experienced with him. He also didn't always seem to be fully stable mentally either. He appeared to be suffering from intense anxiety and paranoia, and possibly schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. Outside of school, Nathan had been a long-time consumer of psychiatric treatment, as his unstable personality had not gone unnoticed by the adults in his life. He had been taking medication for his condition, but in his own time he would add his own recreational substances into the mix. His experience with drugs also facilitated his stint of dealing drugs to students at the campus. One last but crucial note about Nathan was that he was a big fan of art, as one could imagine having been enrolled at the academy. He had a passion for rather dark film and photography, a passion which could act as a brief distraction from the stresses he would undergo in other parts of his life. One of his favorite classes at the school was that of photography, taught by one Mark Jefferson, a widely known photographer and artist. The teacher saw Nathan's potential and encouraged him in ways that his own father and really no one else had done. With that positive reinforcement, Nathan could sometimes show a lot of promise as a great student and functional photographer when he put his mind to it. It was a much welcome effect on the teenager, so much so that Nathan's father and Principal Wells encouraged Mr. Jefferson's tutelage to at least keep Nathan's mind focused. But despite his outlet into his art, Nathan would often be drawn back into questionable deeds, not giving up his unsung title as drug dealer for some students and a troubled rich bully to others. And as it turns out, the combination of his love for dark expressive art, resources as a member of a wealthy family, access to drugs, and lack of empathy for others culminated in the events that he relayed to the police that afternoon, and much more. One night, Nathan and Chloe had been hanging out together before going back to Nathan's apartment. Nathan said they had been drinking before, and pretty soon Chloe had passed out in his room. Nathan said he took the opportunity to take out his camera and take photos of her. Not nudes or anything like that, he insisted. Just normal photos, like as a prank. He claimed she then woke up as he was taking a photo and attacked him, ran out, and that was it. The police were of course skeptical if that was the whole truth, given the setup of the situation and how it had escalated. Her blackmailing him for taking pictures of her simply sleeping seemed to leave something out, so they prodded at the boy's then unstable psyche, asking him to be more specific about the details. It was during this that he let slip that he may have added something to one of Chloe's drinks, and that the photos were a chance for him to create some artistic shots that could finally impress. The questioning grew more intense when the investigators were gaining more of these details out of Nathan. They were running intimidation tactics. By the end of Nathan's account, they basically claimed that he was fully guilty of possession of illicit drugs and sexual assault. But Nathan insisted. There was no sexual assault involved. It was just art, he said. It's never been for sex. Which the police took to mean this wasn't the first time he sexually assaulted someone, prodding at him further to reveal more. Under the stress of the questioning, Nathan would then, in a panic, deny it desperately, saying again that it was only art, but adding, "He told me it was only for art." Naturally, hearing this, the police inquired who the he was. Nathan hesitated again, as if debating internally if he should say more. The police asked again, more directly, if someone else was involved that night, which Nathan denied. So who was this other person, the police persisted. But this time, Nathan didn't need a further prompt from the police before he decided to give them an unexpected and rather surprising name. Back at Blackwell, not 2 hours had passed, and the entire campus was still buzzing over the recent events of the day. Popular rich student of prestigious family arrested for murder was quite the pervasive topic, and various emotions were running wild. Lots of trauma and sadness among staff and students, as one can expect. Still, the police were in the area, having the job of asking relevant people relevant questions, recounting events, asking what people saw, what they knew of the victim and the suspect. Blackwell staff were having their own meetings addressing the events, lamenting what had happened, with many commending the security guard for his quick response. It was in the middle of all of this, at around 6:30 in the afternoon, that an additional police car arrived. Not unexpected given the commotion, but these particular officers that came from the car had a very specific goal in mind, as it turned out. Students saw them enter the school, likely expecting them to be doing more routine cleanup or questioning. But everyone outside was shocked when, moments later, the officers exited the building with a teacher in tow. They headed straight for the car they arrived in, placed the teacher inside, and drove away. Photography teacher Mr. Mark Jefferson had been taken to the police station for questioning. Back at the police station, Nathan had accused Mark Jefferson. He said that Mr. Jefferson was the one who had taught him about the art of taking photos of girls, as he did to Chloe that night. Confused by this, the police asked if Nathan was insinuating that Mr. Jefferson knew that Nathan was doing this and had seen the pictures himself, to which Nathan replied, yes. In fact, Nathan went so far as to say that Jefferson encouraged him to do it, as it was something that Jefferson was doing himself. When asked how Nathan even knew of this, Nathan said, because he needed my help to do it. Mark Jefferson was originally born in Arcadia Bay, but then went to study at the American Academy of Art in Chicago, after which he made a name for himself countrywide as an expert photographer. He would eventually come back to Arcadia Bay to teach, though not without some prompting. The Prescott family had in fact been responsible for convincing the teacher to return to the place of his birth, effectively putting Blackwell Academy on the map as a place to learn from the great Mark Jefferson, and boosting the number of migrants to the small town in return. The Prescott family gave Jefferson all the funding necessary for him to continue pursuing his craft as a photographer, as a normal teaching salary might not have been the most compelling selling point on its own. With said funding, Jefferson could purchase the equipment he needed, and was also given access to a space owned by the Prescotts with which he could pursue photography and whatever artistic goals that he had. This space was a bunker underneath an old barn owned by the family. This was converted into a makeshift darkroom where he could develop his photos. In being so close to the Prescotts, and with Nathan so interested in Jefferson's craft, Jefferson quickly took the boy under his wing in pursuing his photography skills as mentioned. After being taught by Jefferson in various private sessions since around 2011, Nathan said that one day Jefferson set up Nathan with the task of imitating his own take on vulnerable photographic imagery. Nathan said Jefferson himself had a collection of photos depicting women in docile, sleep-like states. To get practice in this regard, one day Nathan arrived at the bunker where Jefferson was already busy at work. Inside the bunker was a girl, dazed and half asleep. Nathan hadn't recognized her, but Jefferson assured him that she was alright and had just taken something to keep herself in the best mood for the photos. Jefferson showed Nathan the ropes of photographing her, instructing him on lighting, shadows, poses, etc. When it was over, Jefferson simply picked the now unconscious girl up, drove her near to her home, and that was that. A seemingly innocuous task, the young Nathan was just excited that he had managed to snap some photos of his own, happy with the compliments that Jefferson gave him. In the months that followed, photo sessions like these would continue, but from then on, Jefferson would instruct Nathan to bring in new photogenic subjects by himself. Jefferson said he would help to select girls that wanted to be in the spotlight, based on his interactions with them from his classes at the school, and Nathan would be given the task of bringing them to the bunker's dark room. As Jefferson had put it, the girls he chose were predetermined to love the opportunity to be subjects in his beautiful work. The most appropriate time would be when the subjects are most pliable, vulnerable, and unaware, he said, stating that these qualities helped the models to evoke the best imagery. Jefferson required that Nathan also source enough intoxicants for the activity, for before, during, and after. Luckily for Nathan, as Jefferson would point out, he was in a prime position to find girls in such a state, as Nathan was, after all, an influential head of Blackwell's own Vortex Club, a club which was known for having large and sometimes exclusive parties, which more often than not involved the use of illegal substances. And so began a repeated period of Nathan using the opportunities afforded to him at said club parties to drug unsuspecting girls, covertly take them to the darkroom where they could take part in involuntary photo shoots, and then back to campus, having been so heavily sedated that they wouldn't even be able to remember where they had been for the past several hours of being photographed. However, at some point in their dealings, Nathan realized that the sessions became less about instructing him and improving his talent, and more about providing Jefferson with new subjects, which he spent a large amount of time fussing over. It got to the point where Nathan barely got to take 2 photos in a session. Nathan soon felt like he simply wasn't doing much at all, but still, he obeyed Jefferson. According to Nathan, he was just doing as he was told, giving photogenic girls drugs just so they could be captured in photos in a state of beauty as a favor to them, and then safely dropped off back where they belonged. When asked about whether he was going to take Chloe back to the bunker as well, Nathan responded in the negative, saying that he just wanted to take photos of her in that state because it just felt like an opportunity to work on his craft without needing to bring someone back to Jefferson. Now, all of this was a lot to swallow for the police, but nevertheless it was a highly serious accusation and in enough detail that it was worth looking into. Human trafficking, basically. With all the information in play, the police brought Mark Jefferson in for questioning, who of course denied it all. Nathan had a history of mental instability, just shot some poor girl, and was now trying to frame a renowned, respected photographer for an odd and seemingly unrelated string of crimes. Jefferson wouldn't deny that he had worked with Nathan at the school or that he was funded by the Prescotts, but he denied any dealings with young girls in bunkers, and with that, he denied any further comment without a lawyer. In this time, Nathan's father had arrived to the station to help Nathan's situation. At first, visibly annoyed that Nathan himself hadn't invoked his right to an attorney, Sean was allotted some time to speak with his son and work on getting him legal representation. Meanwhile, the Arcadia Bay Police Department took Nathan's account and ran with it, the implications being too significant to ignore. They had requested to search the alleged Prescott bunker for evidence of Nathan's account, but were initially denied by his father, who wasn't too keen on having any more of his son's unknown misdeeds potentially aired out. The police were about to have to request a search warrant, but surprisingly, after talking with his son, Sean Prescott had decided to allow for the officers to search the property. And before the morning of the following Tuesday, the police had made their way to the place that Nathan spoke of. The intended storm shelter was hidden beneath a hatch in the barn, which led to an eerily cold and metallic hallway with a door locked with a keypad. The investigating police made their way down to the heavy metal door locked at the end of the hallway and entered the code that had been relayed to them. The door opened, and upon entering, the police were met with a room that was honestly kind of confusing. It looked like a strange mix of a lab, a kitchen, an office, and a dark room. Shelves lined the walls with canned goods and food supplies. There was a sink amidst a few counters where various pieces of hardware equipment could be noticed. Hauntingly dark pictures lined the walls. In the half of the room furthest from the door, which was separated by a curtain, there was a computer, desk, printers, tripods, cameras, crates of photography equipment, a couch, and lots of lighting equipment. Without knowing that something suspicious may have happened here, it could have been seen as the home of just a very busy, very artistic doomsday prepper. But that view of the place would only last if someone didn't actually look into the various files hidden around the room, which of course the investigators did. First of note, there were literal notes, handwritten and typed, all of which seemed to specifically be addressing Nathan. A couple were obviously from his father, as noted by the verbiage used, and some of them having his signature. In short, the messages berated Nathan for his subpar deeds at Blackwell. Another note, however, seemed far more intriguing. It bore no sender identification. It only mentioned that the sender wanted Nathan to use burner phones and not speak to them conspicuously while in public. Searching further around the room, the police soon made the horrible discovery that would have completely justified a search warrant. Inside a cupboard on the edge of the room were an assortment of red binders on shelves, organized neatly and all labeled with female names. A look into most of them would reveal photos of girls, dazed, helpless, confused, and often asleep. Those who weren't unconscious were bound by the hands and feet and looked completely out of it. The environment in the photos was obviously the dark room that the police were currently in, staged and lit meticulously for the photos. There were several binders and several photos in each. The names went on: Tyra, Lynn, Kelly, Susie, Alexis. There were a couple binders, however, that didn't have photos, but still had names. A brief look into the nearby computer showed that the photos were also being worked on in post using graphic editing software. The computer, much like the binders, would be taken to the station as evidence. This discovery was massive and would later on shake Arcadia residents to their core. But for now, the police had to figure out how to navigate the evidence and get to the bottom of things. Nathan had already given them an account of how things went, and there seemed to be a few pieces of evidence that hinted to his words regarding Jefferson being true. Apart from the suspicious anonymous note, the files on the confiscated computer also helped to indicate that the computer was often being used during times when Nathan was confirmed to have been elsewhere. But none of these things yielded concrete proof as to Jefferson's involvement, but rather that Nathan was not alone in this. The police had scanned the darkroom for fingerprints, but could only find Nathan's, none from Jefferson. As heinous as it was to confirm that these photo shoots that Nathan described had indeed taken place, with his own willing participation, the focus of the various people now involved in this quickly growing case was all over the place. Nathan was still coming to terms with the guilt of having been responsible for a girl's death. His father had in actuality been shocked at the police's discovery, stating that he had no idea that his son was using the bunker or for the purposes of what was found in the shelves. However, Sean did admit to having given Jefferson access to the bunker itself, all but confirming that Jefferson was certainly involved in what was happening, or at the very least was aware that such photos were being taken. Sean's focus at this point seemed to be on protecting his son and mitigating any of the damage Nathan may have done to the Prescott name, both through his actions and what he confessed to the police. At this point, any scapegoat was invaluable, and Nathan's defense wouldn't hesitate to use his age, mental instability, the effects of drugs, and most of all, the coercion and manipulation of a much older adult to get him off easy. When confronted with the evidence as well as the knowledge that the police had of Jefferson being the only other person with access to the bunker, Jefferson still denied his involvement. His lawyer pointing out that Jefferson could have been out of the bunker during the time of the photos being taken, and that his knowledge of what was inside the binders was just an assumption. As Jefferson denied any accusations against him by the Prescotts, the police soon confronted both Nathan and Jefferson separately with a more specific matter, one that had caught their immediate attention the moment they had seen the names that were present on the binders in the cupboard. Perhaps the most attention-grabbing piece of evidence in the entire cupboard for the police, as it harkened back to a very recent case that was still fresh in everyone's minds, the one binder sitting among all the others, which inside, clear as day, were photos of the one, the only, Rachel Amber. It had been about 6 months, but now, finally, there seemed to be a spark in the cold case of the missing girl. It was undoubtedly her, as everyone in town would have been familiar with her appearance ever since the missing person posters had gone up. In one photo, she could be seen lying asleep on the floor, hands bound with something in her mouth. Another showed her sitting in a corner, again bound, but awake and very much upset. She was wearing a black top, jean shorts, and no shoes. There was one photo that stood out starkly from the rest. The setting wasn't indoors, but outside on a patch of dirt with some scatterings of grass around it. Rachel was lying down, passed out as before, but of particular interest was Nathan himself lying just above her, his leg under the back of her head. His body was slightly contorted, as Rachel's was, as though they'd both haphazardly fallen in that position. However, unlike Rachel, Nathan was awake and content, possibly inebriated based on his expression. Needless to say, this didn't look good. A missing girl was now all but confirmed to have been a victim in an awful chain of abductions of young girls, and hadn't been seen again in half a year. So naturally the suspects were confronted with the now reopened Rachel Amber case. When approached with the subject of Rachel Amber, Jefferson remained tight-lipped, eventually insisting on Nathan's guilt once again, given his presence in one of the photos. For Nathan, mention of Rachel had left him visibly shaken. He wouldn't be able to comment on what the police had found out about Rachel initially before convening with his legal representation. But luckily enough, after doing so, Nathan was willing to give an entirely new account, specifically regarding the missing girl. Back to April 19th, almost 6 months prior to the date, Nathan claimed that he had been having a small get-together involving students from one of Blackwell Academy's clubs. It was a fairly normal night, as other club members would later testify to. It was about an hour or more later that he drove back to the barn and went down into the bunker. However, when he got inside, the lights were on and Rachel was on the floor in the center of the room, being photographed by Mark Jefferson. Nathan said he hung around the room for a while, taking a few hits of something benign and observing the session. Nathan was then allowed to take a photo or two and then left. This process repeated a few times over that weekend, until that Sunday when something happened. Nathan was at the bunker without Jefferson. He was more heavily intoxicated than before, having taken several hits before and during his stay at the bunker. At some point, he got it in his head that he had to take the best photos that he'd ever had, while Jefferson wasn't there to limit him. With his new inspiration, he attempted to begin taking photos, but Rachel was more lucid that day, and of course, not at all happy. He said he sedated Rachel to once again put her in a better state for him to work. Rachel effectively dropped to the floor in minutes. Nathan took this time to snap several photos, most of which he considered not good enough. He posed Rachel in every way he could, but they were never good enough, he said. That he couldn't have impressed Jefferson with those photos. When prompted to continue his account, Nathan said that after taking his many photos of Rachel on Sunday, he was quite high himself. Having taken more than the usual in his fit of inspiration, he remembered Mr. Jefferson returning to the bunker and being upset with him. He also remembered Jefferson taking more photos. He remembered the both of them going outside, but didn't recall actually moving Rachel with them. His memories of that Sunday were hazy, he claimed. When asked what he remembered of what happened to Rachel, Nathan said he didn't remember, nor did he even remember taking the photo that he was in with Rachel. But his lack of memory about that day troubled him and the police, because unlike all the other girls he had taken to be photographed, Rachel was one of the only ones that he couldn't remember bringing home, and was coincidentally the only one Nathan hadn't seen since. Nathan said he was worried the worst could have happened, and if so, then Jefferson would have been the one responsible. With that last photo being the only clue as to where Rachel may have been since being in the dark room, police then began searching for the outdoor spot in the photo. But it wasn't easy. There weren't many identifying features to the location in the photo beyond that it was clearly outside and had some bits of trash on the ground. Arcadia Bay was searched for a couple days until investigators stumbled upon a rather promising location, an old junkyard next to some train tracks, filled with dilapidated cars, appliances, and old thrown-out structures. Coincidentally, it was found that Rachel had indeed been to the junkyard before, evidenced by some graffiti that bore her name. It didn't take long for them to comb the area and find a spot that looked oddly familiar to the one in the photo. The spot was scanned for anything indicating that Rachel had been there. What stood out was the disturbed soil in the middle of the patch in the ground, hinting at it having been dug up sometime recently. So with that, investigators started digging. But they were barely 2 shovels deep before stumbling upon some fabric. Black, followed by some jeans. October 9th, 2013. Only 2 days after Chloe Price was pronounced dead by bullet wound, Rachel Amber was found dead and buried in the Arcadia Bay junkyard. A disturbing and heartbreaking story for everyone in the Bay. The girl who everyone had thought to have simply ditched the small town to follow her dreams had actually been lifeless all that time, a mere 3 feet under the ground. Examination of the body showed that she had died of a lethal overdose, undoubtedly not by her own hand. When asked about this, Nathan said he had given Rachel nothing but the normal dosage that he would usually give her, which would often just leave her dazed and sleepy. She wasn't dead when I was taking photos of her, he said. She wasn't dead when I left either. It had to be Jefferson. In her system, there was found to be evidence of GHB and various other methamphetamines. The Prescott's attorney would eventually use these discoveries to assert that Jefferson had been the one to kill Rachel after photographing her, covertly drugging Nathan as well so that he wouldn't be a reliable witness. This was also predicated on the rumor that Jefferson and Rachel had been in an inappropriate student-teacher relationship before the date that she went missing. As someone passionate about modeling, it was no surprise that Rachel took an interest in Jefferson's work, and it was proposed that Jefferson would have used his position to exploit this. Not to mention that their inappropriate relationship could bring about more reason for which Jefferson may have wanted Rachel out of the picture permanently, an easier than usual task since Rachel had been so vocal about escaping the town. The discovery of Rachel's death, which closely followed Chloe Price's death, led to rumors being circulated around town and more bad press for the Prescotts. The townsfolk were well aware that Chloe and Rachel had been friends, so it was hard not to think of the 2 deaths as being related, and Nathan being at the center of it. Many who knew of Jefferson's involvement with both Rachel and Nathan were also willing to believe that he had something to do with it. The involvement of Rachel and ultimately her discovery naturally led to the Amber family rising to the forefront of this case. James and Rose, Rachel's parents, were beside themselves with grief, and James eventually resolved himself to his job as prosecutor for the case, in solidarity with Chloe's parents. The prosecution was focused on making Nathan feel the full brunt of the law for all his crimes, while Nathan's defense focused on mitigating the resulting sentence, which not only included incriminating Jefferson, but arguing that Chloe Price's aggravation of Nathan in the bathroom that day played a part in prompting Nathan to defend himself with the threat of a firearm. Jefferson's defense maintained his ignorance and innocence in any part of the abduction conspiracy, again using the evidence discovered and cause of death to assert that Nathan was solely involved in the killing. Victims of the dark room who had been identified after the photos had been discovered were also seeking justice, having now been informed of periods in their life where they couldn't really remember much, and had otherwise thought that they just got really drunk or high at a party. Some said they had faint memories of Nathan from those times. Some also mentioned remembering Jefferson's voice as well. But it was also argued that that wasn't out of the ordinary or suspicious considering Jefferson's involvement in people's lives as a teacher. There were a few victims found in the photos who could not be identified within the town, which may have been further indication that the activity of photographing helpless young women was something that extended outside the bounds of Arcadia Bay. These testimonies and circumstances were slowly adding up, but still, were they concrete enough to prove Jefferson's involvement beyond a doubt, as the Prescotts intended? Well, the answer to that would be yes. With all the evidence put forth, and looking at the circumstances of such a professionally put together setup in a dark room which was given access to for a professional photographer, there was no doubt Nathan didn't do all those acts on his own. And that left only one logical conclusion for most people examining the case. The prestige of the Prescotts had garnered them some support in the case, as well as Nathan's own mental history and the successful conviction of Jefferson. The Prescotts pushed for Nathan to be placed in a mental health institution rather than simply going to jail, but the severity of the crimes was simply too much, even disregarding everything that came out after the shooting of Chloe Price. That October, Nathan was convicted of the decidedly second-degree murder of Chloe Price, as well as the kidnapping of multiple girls and all the offenses that came with it. He was given a hard-fought sentence of 25 years in prison. This would be a sentence that the Prescott's legal team would still try to work on well into the future, with a parole hearing being had as early as 2017. In November of 2013, Mark Jefferson was sentenced to life in prison for the assisted kidnapping and assault on well over a dozen young girls. Justice for the murder of Rachel Amber had been up in the air for quite some time, but the district attorney's office ultimately fought hard to successfully put the blame on both Jefferson and Nathan as accomplices in the murder. Chloe Price's funeral was held on the Friday of that week at the local Arcadia Bay Cemetery. Her service was well attended by her mother, stepfather, different residents, and friends she had in Arcadia Bay, as well as old classmates from Blackwell. Chloe was a firecracker, as told by the people who knew her, with unyielding wit, limitless creativity, and chill vibes. She was always the first one to stick up for her friends and call out BS when she saw it. It was an awful tragedy that her life was taken at the tender age of 19, alongside what had happened to so many other girls. Rachel's funeral would be held a couple weeks later in Sunnyside Cemetery in Long Beach. Given Rachel's wishes to one day return to the place of her birth while she was alive, as well as the awful events that had taken place within Arcadia Bay itself, Rachel's parents thought it best to give her a burial back in California. We've already talked at length about the kind of person Rachel was, but it simply could not be understated what a character she had. Loved by many, a chameleon fitting into several groups, always dreaming, wanting more, and doing more. And her loss was deeply felt by the countless people who knew her, and even those who didn't. There were so many girls who were victims of the terrible darkroom operation that could have ended up like Rachel did. Since they weren't all accounted for as being from Arcadia Bay, there could definitely be more young girls buried in junkyards across America, their last moments being drugged, surrounded by bright camera flashes. Unwilling models unfairly taken to be part of someone's twisted idea of art.